share with Liz just a little bit of background on her, and you might have seen this in our emails, but so she holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from the University of Mumbai. I love Mumbai. And an MBA from the University of San Francisco. Prior to her current role, which we'll talk a lot about, she was Senior Vice President and General Manager of Cisco's Cloud, Compute, and IoT business. She's also led the Service Provider Access Group, where she was responsible for strategy for Cisco's portfolio of carrier Ethernet access solutions. And she's been Vice President of Engineering Strategy and Portfolio Planning and held multiple engineering roles leading global teams. What I'm also really excited about is she is the Cisco Global Executive Sponsor for the Women in Science and Engineering program. So we have a lot to talk about. I have so many questions for you. We've already gotten a bunch of questions submitted, both here live and actually just in general over email. So I'm going to dive right in, but to everyone who is on here, you are welcome to start submitting questions whenever you want, and then we will call on you if your question gets chosen. So with that, Liz, your title has strategy in it. A lot of students I talk to say, I want to work in strategy. But strategy is such a big word. So what does it mean to lead strategy for a company or a department?
You know, I asked myself that same question last summer when I took on the role. And when our CEO talked to me about being the Chief Strategy Officer, I was not entirely sure what that means because I ran a business unit prior to that. And, you know, when you run a business unit, strategy and the development part of it in terms of the operational part are all part of what you do in terms of running a business, right? So I'm thinking, what exactly is corporate strategy, right? So that was a little bit of learning, quite a bit of learning for me as well. And I netted out to a few things, right? Strategy for me, it starts with a thinking. It's what you do with people, not what you do to people. And there's a difference. And here, I'll explain it this way. You know, I think you've got to come in with a mindset around strategies, what you do working with a team, you know, and we did that. We built our 3-year strategy last summer in terms of where is Cisco going to go in the next 3 years. And we did that working, you know, I've got a team of about 30, 35 people who are on the strategy team today. And we did that working with all of my peers who sit on our executive leadership team, a couple of their GMs and other, you know, functional folks under them as well. And it really is around this getting aligned on our objectives. And our CEO helped define what those objectives were. The first thing was first, second, and third, it was about growth. Growth for us, growth for our customers as well. The second was around innovating and our speed of execution, because what we've seen during the pandemic is that 10 years worth of technology got adopted probably in this last 12 to 15 months, right? So our customers were consuming technology at a pace that we'd never seen before. So speed of execution was paramount. How do we build great products that at the end of the day, our customers really love? And that helps them, you know, kind of, they're passionate about it. So it really was where my team and I got together. We built a framework, because it's very easy when you're, you know, even when you're iterating, when somebody's built something before. Otherwise, you're just throwing things in the whiteboard, which we've done as well. That's how we built the framework. And we took insights from our customers. Like, what are our customers thinking? What are the problems that they're facing now? What do they see as problems coming up? We took insights from experts in terms of industry experts on what are potentially the things that we should be thinking about, and analysts. We had our own internal views on what are the trends, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and we put an operational lens on it in terms of going, you know, this is not about us going out there and going, hey, the autonomous car market looks good, so are we going to go build a new car? We put an operational lens on it going, can we execute credibly on this, right? Because market opportunities can be huge. They could be multi-billion dollars, multi-trillion, but can Cisco execute on some of that? So we put that lens on it as well. And that's how we created the framework, which then we iterated working with our CEO, working with our board, working with, you know, other executives in the company. We completed that over, I would say, a 3 to 4 month period. And then it was communicate, because there's a part of how you do strategy top down. There's also a part of what you do in terms of aligning bottoms up, because You need folks to align to the work that they do. How do they tie it to that strategy? Because that execution happens grounds up. So you can't sit in an ivory tower up here and define things, because if that's all that you do, that piece of paper and a quarter won't even buy you a cup of coffee, right? It'll just remain on paper. So it's the communication and alignment. Think about it in a company that has 70,000 plus people, the communicate part. And then we iterate on that as well. You know, we get smarter as we talk about it, engage with our customers, what we execute. So we don't update our strategy like every month or so, but there are updates that happen maybe every 6 months or so as we get smarter on this. So that's, I would say, is in a nutshell in terms of teamwork is so important. Aligning on objectives is super important. And then the credibility, looking at it and going, can we execute on it? And then the communication parts. Those are the pieces I would say if you want to work in strategy. It's a great way to understand every single part of business in the company, and aspirationally to look at where could you go, which is super exciting.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Is there one of those pieces that you're most either that you love most or dislike most, or that's like hardest or easiest or anything like that?
I'd say it's the part around how do you get alignment is probably the toughest part of it.
It sounds
because
like
we have a lot of smarts within the company to be able to help define it, getting larger company aligned to it so that everyone in the company should feel, you know, things that I do, this is how it ties into the strategy. So I know that what I'm working on as an individual contributor, as a manager, I'm contributing to what is our long-term strategy. And so for that, you know, people come with different mindsets and different agendas. It's like, how do you bring all of that together when you're talking about 70,000 plus people? There are some days I just want to go, you know, maybe I could just record it, hit record, or say, and then just play it. But it doesn't quite work that way. But what we're getting better at is more and more people are out there talking about the strategy. So we do that internally. We do that with our customers. We do that with our investors and analysts as well. And then obviously that's because executing the strategy is a big part, right? Because I think as somebody said before, strategy without execution is hallucinations. So the execution part takes a lot longer.
Awesome. So let's rewind back a little. I mentioned I talk to students all the time and recent grads who say, I want to work in strategy. When you were in college, like tell us about Liz in college. Did you want to work in strategy? Did you know that this was the career path? And if not, what did you want to do?
I didn't even know what strategy was about when I was in college because it was such a long time back too. But part of it, you know, is when I was in college, I was highly influenced by my parents and their careers. My dad was an attorney and my older sister is an attorney. So I didn't want to go to law school just because I didn't want to be, you know, there's Teresa's younger sister doing the same thing again. That was the way I picked kind of what I wanted to study in college. But my mother used to work for the Department of Atomic Energy, and I've been to work with her. Nowadays we call it like, you know, oh, take your kids to work day. But I used to go to work with her when we didn't have school. And so I thought I'd love to be a scientist. And so that's how I got my, you know, my degree in chemistry. And my minor was physics and math, but most of the time was spent in chemistry. And that's what I thought I'd be doing. I'd be a chemist working on maybe something similar, like, you know, work for the Atomic Research Center, like my mother did. Did not have an idea that, you know, what a career in corporate would look like because neither of my parents had a corporate job.
So it makes sense then that you were studying science in your undergrad. So tell us about that first job that you got out of school.
My first job, I think, was an internship that actually paid me money. It was not a free internship.
Nice.
So, yeah, so I look at that as my first job. I was doing a research project about LLDPE, linear low density polyethylene. It's polymer. Think about it as plastic in terms of plastic bags, wraps. That's all made of LLDPE. After that, I just quickly found out that working as a scientist is you do a lot of things by yourself. And I get my energy, a lot of it. In many ways, even though I'm an introvert, I like being around people. I get my energy from that. And when you're a scientist, a lot of things that you're doing requires you to kind of work, on your own, maybe in smaller groups. So I graduated from that, went to MBA school, and decided that my first job would be in sales. More so because, somebody said that, hey, sales is where you get to meet with the different customers. It's on a path to where you can go into product management. And so my first job out of MBA school was selling mainframes, mostly to banks.
Wow, that's unbelievable. And I feel like people don't appreciate how much I think a sales job can be as a first job out of school or out of grad school, out of undergrad, to really help with all skills. What are your thoughts? Like when you think back to the fact that that was your first job after MBA?
I didn't have what we have right now in terms of mentors and sponsors at that time. My parents thought I was completely crazy wanting to do a sales job. And it was outlined as, that's the way to get into a management job, for example, and it paid really well. And I think compared to my family, I was always the one in terms of who wanted to be financially independent. That was a big motivating factor. So that's the reason I picked sales as well, because there's a commissions part to it. Where if you do well, there's a variable part in terms of how you can make money. And so I didn't know much about it going into it. I remember we used to sit in a pit, like there were just desks. It was an open pit. And I was probably the only woman on that sales floor. And I think a month into my job, my boss came out and he started yelling at me for something in front of everybody else. Well, he used to do that to everybody else. And I just burst out crying. It's like I said, it was not something I was prepared for. And everybody just, this was just how the regional manager was, and they were used to it. And so it taught me a few things in terms of where probably pick up a few skills around, how to handle things that are above the line, below the line in terms of what bothers you and what does not. So I think that job did working with customers, and you get a range of customers from great customers to very difficult customers. So those 2 years spent in sales, I think were fantastic in terms of just even knowing how do you build relationships, and you have to build relationships with a range of people. You don't get to choose, especially your work relationships. You can decide who you want to socialize after that, but I think that job was instrumental in helping me, one, develop a little bit of a thicker skin and also help build relationships as well.
Awesome. You mentioned, I want to ask you about the fact that you've been at Cisco for 21 years plus, but before I do, you mentioned you were the only woman on the sales floor at the time. And I had mentioned earlier that you are the executive sponsor for the Women in Science and Engineering program at Cisco, which sounds like an amazing program. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that program, but also I'd love to hear more thoughts on like why you felt it was so important for, to join as an executive sponsor and really be a part of that.
What I love about our Women in Science and Engineering, it's very much a community program. It's a community developed, it's a ground up movement. It's founded by engineers, and engineers do all the work in there. And it's not just in the engineering organization, it's in our services organization, it's in our IT organization. So even though, I sat in engineering and still do for a portion of, what my team does, it is absolutely led by the engineers, community driven, cover everything from, what do we need to do in terms of improving our tech skills, networking, career development. And we do a bunch of stuff in terms of, especially, locally, it's got chapters globally as well. And we do a lot of things in the community as well, especially in terms of how do we, kind of go and drive more STEM in underdeveloped communities. And so for me, being the exec sponsor for it, I felt like it was more the easier job, because at the end of the day, I fund it. I provide help in terms of, I used to have a coach who was really good at how do you present? And especially engineers, it's not something that you're taught. It's not something that you have to do every single day. While in sales and marketing, you do that every single day in front of customers. So I brought in my own coach in terms of, how she helped me improve my presentation skills. So I do those things. And the reason it's super important is when I started at Cisco 21 years ago, for the first 5 to 6 years, I didn't even know what mentors and sponsors were about. It took about, probably in my 6th year or so when somebody even reached out to me. And the moves that I've made, this is my 12th role within the company, have been a big part because of mentors that I've talked to who've introduced me, sponsors who have advocated for me. And so for me, being in a position that I am right now, being able to do the same for others within the company was absolutely important. And the fact that, we haven't quite figured out yet in terms of how we improve diversity in tech. I'm talking about diversity across the full spectrum, of which gender is just one of them. Cisco does it better than a whole lot of other companies, but still not where we'd like it to be. So what are the things we need to do in the community as well? So all of that is part of WISE, and I love the charter of WISE. And so I continue to stay as the exec sponsor, but mind you, the bulk of the work gets done by the teams.
Just to everyone who's watching, I'm going to ask one final question, and then I want to hand it over to you all. So just as a reminder, if you'd like your question answered, all I ask that you do is either press the Q&A button or the chat, either one, and submit your name, where you go to school, or your current internship or job, and if you're willing to go live on video, and then of course what your question is. So I'm going to hand it over to you all in 1 minute or in one moment. But the last question I have for you, Liz, you mentioned just now you've been at Cisco for 21 years. Wow, I've done WayUp now for over 7 years, and I feel like I know very few people who've been at their current companies longer than I. So you're tripling me, and I think a lot of people get scared of staying at the same company for that long. It's this whole FOMO aspect of fear of getting pigeonholed into one sector or fear of missing out on what else is out there. What's driven you to stay at Cisco for so long, and what advice do you have for recent grads who are maybe eager to try out a ton of different companies so that they can know what they do or don't like?
I did intend to stay for 21 years when I joined Cisco. I was thinking 12 months, 24 months, get transferable skills in my resume, go somewhere else, right? Because I'm thinking my mother did. She stayed for a long time working at the same company. And I was like, oh, that is so not me. And so I never started off that way at all. But for me, what became increasingly important after that 12, 24 months is I got an opportunity to, one, learn. Two is the company's culture was such that it didn't require me to conform. While there are fewer tech female executives and diverse executives within Cisco, it's still a whole lot more than where we were before. So there were not a lot of people who looked like me, walked like me, talked like me. But the culture was such that it accepted me, and I love that about it. I love what we do as a company in terms of where our culture, our principles, our ethics, those things, the way we stand up for things. Like it may not be something that, everyone agrees to, but in terms of moral values, what we believe in social justice, those are increasingly important for me. And then the other one was, my opportunity to actually grow. I have taken roles where I've had very little to no domain expertise, and I've had the opportunity to be able to build those up and thrive in those roles. And all of those things, again, combined with the fact that we care about our people, we care about the community, we care about, our customers. And probably the day we stop doing that, I'd look for something else, but we have not. And so those are all the things that has made me stay here for a very long time, and I'll continue to do that. I would say is when you're thinking about your first, second, third job, think about the learning aspects first, because it's really hard to figure out, this is exactly what my career path needs to be. And it's interesting because I'm a highly analytical person, and I always have my plan A, plan B, plan C. Most of the times, those plans go by the wayside because things change. Opportunities come for which you probably never even thought that that's an opportunity you would take, and you end up doing it, and it's one of the best kind of roles that I've done. So I'd say is think about it in a place where, can I learn? Is it a place that conforms to my values? Because that is important. Yes, a paycheck and a good paycheck is super important, but day in and day out, when you think about it, does the company conform to my values? And it may not be 100%, but does it do it majority of the time? Do you get an opportunity to learn and, to go? I look at Cisco as one company, multiple careers, because that's exactly what I've done in 12, different roles, especially with increasing responsibility as well. And if you find that you're not going to find that in that same company, perfectly fine in terms of going and looking for it elsewhere as well. But, make those choices a little bit wisely, like choose wisely about what those choices are when you decide you're going to move from one company to the other. I would say is, at the end of the day, your career is really about playing the long game. It's not about the next quarter or the next calendar year. Your career will span across tens of years. So how do you think about, kind of forward progress in chunks, not like leaps for that matter? So that's the advice that I would give, because 21 years ago when I joined the company as an individual contributor engineer, I don't think I even aspired to the role that I'm in right now, because I didn't even know what it was, didn't even think it was possible.
I love that concept of just focusing more on long-term career and not just the fact that your career doesn't end in 3 months, so optimizing for the next quarter. I think that's great, and I think more people need to hear that, and so thank you for sharing that. All right, we're going to head into the attendee questions. Just as a quick reminder to everyone, because we're seeing most of the questions forgetting to do this, please submit whether you are comfortable going live over video so we can make sure we know whether to read your question on your behalf or whether you want to ask it live. I'll start with the first one that we're going to ask on this person's behalf. It's a great question from someone named Ikram, who's a master's in organizational leadership. And Ikram's question is, what advice would you give a student who wants to move into tech and strategy as a field, but who doesn't have management or leadership work experience? What are some practical steps you recommend?
So you can start with as an analyst, for example, and you don't need, when you're starting off, and it's like not everyone comes in with management skills. And by the way, I would look at it as a combination of, but everyone has the ability to lead a team if they want to, and so desire to do that as well. And you can learn from others as well. So I would say there's multiple roles in terms of where you can actually come in and be an analyst and learn, and be part of the team that's looking at things like the future of work, for example. Like the future of work will include multiple things. Culture is a big part of it. In terms of the employee experience, it's not just about the technology. The tech is a big part of it as well. So you can bring in, we need these different experiences, whether that is through school or experiences that you've had in other companies, where you can come in, start on the team, and work on projects, and maybe you can decide as to whether you want to go down the path of an individual contributor because you want more depth in that area, or you actually want to be able to manage a team, and where you might not be doing each and every project in detail as well. So not everyone comes in with all the skills. I'm a great example of that. And being at a company that gives you an opportunity to pick those up, there's definitely, those are the companies to pick. I would think about, what interests you about that strategy role, and make decisions based on that, because sometimes just a title and a description sounds really good, but it's like, what interests you, and is it a place where you feel like you can actually pick up new skills? Because when you're starting off, picking up those skills and what looks good on your resume in terms of transferable skills as you go to the next opportunity are all important as well. So I hope that helps, Ikram.
That's awesome. The next question I'm also going to read on this person's behalf, and then hopefully we'll have some folks who want to turn their video on, although I know it can be intimidating, but I promise you, Liz is obviously amazing, and everyone on this call is watching only to learn from everyone else. So this next person his name is Japir. He recently completed his BBA specializing in finance and tech at the University of Washington, currently working at SeaTac Airport as a logistics associate. And Japir is wondering, what makes a competitive candidate at Cisco. He was curious about specifically in finance, but also just in general. When you think about candidates you meet, I'm sure you interview all the time. What helps someone stand out?
So when I think about early in career, and when I think early in career, either you've just graduated, you've got a year or two of experience as well, I really am not looking for like domain specific knowledge, especially any of the, technology. I mean, you might have a technical area of study that you've done in college, but I'm really looking for a few things in terms of ambition, passion, those are the things in terms of what I look for in somebody, and the curiosity to want to be able to learn, because the other pieces you can actually absolutely pick up on the job. Now, if you have a little bit more experience outside of college, yes, it'll help in terms of, that domain expertise comes in as well. But if you're just graduating from college, I think the expectation for somebody to have domain expertise, whether it's in finance or, because you're still looking at theoretical expertise at the end of the day, right? And very many times it helps, but sometimes it doesn't help in terms of its theory, that sometimes it's hard to put in practice as well. So I would say is, when I look at my finance partners, a lot of what they've helped, while they're very solid in terms of the fiscal responsibility and guiding us, what makes them a great business partner is when they come onto the team and learn my business. Because then they're balancing it with more around, how do you help the team and me help manage the P&L? Especially, there's multiple aspects of the P&L in terms of your bookings, revenue, margins, etc., and then the OpEx as well. But they do it in a way that's not just clinically looking at the numbers, but because they understand the business so well. Obviously, you've got to work. Even my last this current finance partner, I think it took her about 3 to 6 months to get up to speed in the business. But then the recommendations come based on what she knows about the business. So I don't even have to jump in and say, well, that won't work. She's coming in with recommendations that combine kind of her fiscal responsibility with what the business needs as well. Those are things you learn on the job. And so that's what I would say is, it's like you're not expected to know that. But if you come in with an open mind in terms of you have that passion, you have that curiosity, you want to learn, hugely helpful.
I love it. These are gems of like pearls of wisdom and truly gems. So thank you so much. All right, the next question, and just as a quick reminder to everyone, when you're submitting your question, if you could please list whether you're willing to go on video, that would be so helpful. Otherwise, we'll keep assuming you don't want to go on video and we'll ask on your behalf. So with that, the next question is from Jesse, and Jesse wants to know, from the times that you had to adjust strategic processes, we know there can be resistance from stakeholders, right? A lot of people, of course, don't like change. And so Jesse's question is just around what's the best way to approach people is in order to get them to join the process that you want them to change to. And by the way, Jesse goes to Florida Gulf Coast University. Jesse, thanks for your question.
Hey, Jesse, what I would say is, most often than not, people resist, not because they intentionally just want to resist. They're doing it more so because they're looking at it and going, does this align to the agenda and objectives that I have? Is it going to help it? Is it going to slow it down? I think that's where it comes from. So understanding the different agendas and objectives that people have as you're working through this is important as well. And so then if you can kind of shape the conversation to, this is what we're doing and this is how it's going to help you as well. You start with that and can actually articulate that and say with actual examples on how you do that, that helps a lot. And at times there might be where, you're not going to meet 100% of their objectives as well. And this is when you look out to see, who's influential. Like if you're talking to a group of 10 people, really you don't need all 10 of them to say yes. You need the majority of them to say yes. So how do you understand? And again, this is something that you've got to learn, work through, talk to others around to say, we're the most influential out of that bunch of 10. And you work that first. And then using, them in the room as well. If there's a way you can actually get everybody in the room, that's how you bring the rest of the people along as well. But bringing the question you asked is so super important, because with everything that we do in an organization, You can't be a lone, cowgirl or cowboy out there. You've got to bring people along. And bringing people along takes time, which includes understanding, what is it that you're doing that can actually help them with anything that they're doing? Who are the influential people in the room that you can actually lean on to also bring other people along? Because most often than not, top-down mandates don't necessarily work. They might work in a few things, but it's not an organizational culture where you just want to force things down. This is around, this is the influencing part. And in many ways, sometimes you have to sell internally within the organization, not just do what you do with customers.
What a great skill. I feel like for honestly anyone in any career to even have, to really be able to embody that. So that's fantastic. All right, we are going to call on stage next, Maria. So Maria, you should be getting made a panelist. And once you do, if you could go ahead and turn your video on and unmute yourself. While Maria is doing that, Maria is a Master's of Data Analytics student at Baruch College and has a question about the pandemic. So hi, Maria, thanks for joining.
Hi, my name is Maria. A little bit about me. I did my undergrad in mathematics, and now I'm doing my master's in data analytics here in New York. And I wanted to ask, how has the pandemic changed the work environment, and how has the company adapted over the last year and a half now?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Maria. The last year and a half has certainly been interesting. I will tell you just, we were used to, at Cisco, because we developed the great technology. I mean, WebEx is a great example of that. We always had somebody working remotely, right? So, not in the same conference room. But the difference was we always prioritized people in the conference room. So even the technology and the feature and functionality, even though people could dial in, it always felt like the people who were in the conference room were the ones who, were able to chat and, kind of sometimes people would try to break in and they couldn't actually get in. So it just felt like a little bit of a different experience. Secondly is, I don't think we, when we looked at where do we hire from, even I had this mindset. It was like, talent was always based on, well, where do we have critical mass in terms of people? So those are the locations that we would hire. Well, over the last year and a half, my entire new team came together during the pandemic. I hired 3 of my senior leaders during that. I met one of them recently for lunch. The other 2 I haven't met in person. So the whole notion of talent is actually location agnostic, right? So let's go where the talent is, not just bring the talent to the places that we want them to be. The third one was really around communication. We just over communicated. I mean, we used to have at Cisco what we call check-ins. Every week we do a check-in and we would have different topics, because we have doctors that on board as well. So they'd come in and talk about different things in terms of how do you protect yourself. There were people who had concerns about that. We talk about the business. We bring in people, talk about social justice issues because there were a whole bunch of things going on. We've moved from every week to monthly. Usually about 30 to 40,000 in the company will join, and others will watch it when it's better for their time zone in terms of the replays as well. So if you look at our collaboration technology, it's gotten to where it's become a lot more inclusive, because now we're looking at it and going, the future of work is hybrid. So you have to make your technology such that everybody feels included. I mean, some of the things I can tell you is like your gesture recognition that we do on WebEx right now. It helps more of the introverts who don't want to kind of go in and, kind of come out and say it. You can do gesture recognition, it captures. So we do more and more of that. Our buildings are smart buildings in terms of some of us do go back into the office, but we want to make sure that the cleaning happens in an automated way. So we're bringing together our technology, our culture, which has always been about inclusivity, has expanded to where hire talent from anywhere. Our communication has been even more focused on empathy and understanding, because working from home has been where it's very easy to do 24/7. So mental health has been a forefront of the issues. This past Monday, we had a day for me. Our CEO and our CHRO, or our Chief People Officer, we did 2 or 3 of them last year. But this whole notion of, when you work from home, you don't separate between, when you're on and when you're off. So that has been a topic in terms of how do we make sure that burnout amongst our teams is something that we're working towards. This day for me was great. I went for a 10-mile hike for 4 hours. My feet hated me at the end of it, but I wanted to do it such that I didn't have my phone. It was in my hydration pack. So there's a number of things for us that has changed in terms of how we work as a company, that if you told me this about 15 months ago, it would have been like, oh, interesting. But I think how we work as a company is vastly different than how we did 15 months ago.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you so much, Maria. Fantastic. 10-mile hike. I cannot believe that. All right. Now we're going to call on stage Dylan Tatsuhiro-Tom. While Dylan is being brought on stage, I will introduce Dylan is a major in international business. So Dylan, you can go ahead and turn your video on and unmute yourself so we can hear your question. And just a reminder to everyone else, when you submit your question, please feel free to remind us if you can go video on. So Dylan, with that, we'd love to hear your question.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth Centoni, for coming on. I really appreciate you sharing your experience and kind of, talking about what you experienced at Cisco. And my question to you is, how did you find your passion and why did you decide Cisco? I'm currently a student, an undergraduate student studying international business. And so I'm just trying to narrow down whether it be finance, marketing, sales, accounting, like which department I want to focus on. And so how would you kind of give me advice on how I would go about finding my passion?
Dylan, good question, right? It's something that I get asked. I mean, they're all good questions, but it's something I get asked all the time. When I first started at Cisco, it really was where I wanted to be part of building the technology, not just as a user of the technology. And for me, that was a big motivator in terms of it. I like building things, right? I get, even though I have my roles in strategy, which is a lot of it is definition and kind of, defining more like what's long-term. I still love, I have a group that does incubation, and they look at what are the next growth engines for Cisco. I have a team that looks at applications, and it's a P&L driven business. I love building things. And so for me, that's a motivator in terms of, I wanted a job that included that. So for me, automatically it took out certain jobs, certain, types of roles where you're more around either you're just supporting behind the scenes, or once somebody builds something, you're taking it to market. So that was mainly my motivator. And for me to stay on, it's almost like, I think about, I ask myself, it's like, do you feel passionate about what you do? And I do. I would say 80% of the time, I love what I do, right? There's 20% of the time it's a little crappy, but every job has that. And when you have passion rising from when you talk about what you do and what you like, that's where I would say is that you would gravitate towards. So Dylan, I would ask yourself in terms of, what makes you feel like, hey, I would like to be in this area day in and day out. And it might be that, 12 months down the line, you might change that. So for international business, you may start with, it could be in the strategy area. It could be in a marketing area, right? Finance, I would say is, you have to have an acuity and a mind in terms of for numbers and getting into the details, because some of the best finance folks that I've seen are ones who can actually get into the weeds, but also bring it further up in terms of talking about it as, kind of the separating the forest from the trees as well. But for you to talk at that abstracted level, you need to know the details pretty well. So if you're not very much a detailed oriented person and you want to tick and tie, then finance is not the place. So I think I just use that as one example in terms of, kind of how you think about what is an area that you'd be passionate about day in and day out, and where you feel like the job is something that, yeah, it's hard and challenging, and that's important to have that, but you really like doing it as well.
Thank you for the fantastic question. All right, next up, we are going to welcome on stage, I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, it's either Caleb or Caleb Sajor. You can come on stage, and when you're brought on, we see your name, you can now unmute and turn your video on. And while you're doing that, to introduce you are a recent grad from York College who studied marketing. So Khalid, you can turn your video, oh, there we go, hello, hi. Go ahead and ask your question. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Hello guys. Since I've been following you, you were talking more about how you can go from different entry level, different from what your resume is. I've been turned down by a few interviewers based on the job application they have requirements. They are mine is more about sales, and since we've been talking about you can start from one entry level and then actually make your way up. So my question is, how do I impress interviewers since my resume is different from the job application, and I believe I can do the job?
And is that, are you looking for in sales? Is that what you said? Is like you want to go into a sales role? Is that correct?
Yes, because I've been an assistant store manager and I've done both, like creating events and sales since high school. And since I talk more about sales, it's just a big no for them.
Are they, so I think without knowing details of where you're applying to, there's a few things I would say right off the bat, right? There are some sales roles that require some very specific, maybe knowledge, for example. Like if you're in a sales role within Cisco, even at an entry level, they expect some level of technical background to be able to, even that's just the expectation on some of the roles as well. So I think it's a question of what kind of sales roles that you want to pick, and why sales? Is it because you feel like you've done that before, you're good at it, you like the aspect of talking to customers, you like the aspect of selling to them? I keep thinking about, maybe some of the people that you did get a rejection from, which by the way, rejection is part and parcel of everybody's career. I've been rejected for a number of things that I applied for. A number of them. So maybe I should have mentioned that, Liz, as well. So there was one for my first GM role, just a little bit of a segue, if you're okay, Liz, with this one. So in my first GM job that I applied for, I was 7 or 8 years into the company at that time. And I felt like I wanted to move from an engineering role to a GM role, but I had no experience as a GM. So my first GM role was where I applied for it. I was working for the same manager, who was an SVP at that time. And when the role came up, I asked him and I said, I really would, this was the VP GM of Access. And he said, Liz, this requires very deep domain expertise. So this is just not your domain. Okay, so he hired somebody. That person left within, I think, 12 or 14 months. And when it came up again, I went to him and I said, hey, since this is you're still looking for somebody, I'd like to apply for this. And he was a little irritated at me. And he said, we've had this conversation before. I'm not sure why this is coming up again. You really don't have the domain expertise for this. And I need somebody with domain expertise. So rejection number 2, obviously he's hurt. I can tell you I went to the bathroom and cried a couple of times because, at the end of the day, we're all human. And he hired somebody else who actually left, I think about less than 12 months later. What do? I went and asked him again. And you know what his reply was? He said, oh, what the heck? It's, the business is not in a great shape. What could it hurt? Now, to some people, they would have said, wow, that's an insulting way to get a job. But for me, the way I looked at it is, yeah, sure, it did hurt the way he said it. And I didn't appreciate it. But I had to focus myself on, was it about getting insulted or the fact that I get an opportunity, even if the business was not in a great shape, to go after that? So what happens is I pick up that business and 2 years later, turn it around. that gave me the step up to the next GM role. This is after working in the company for 7 or 8 years, mind you, with kind of deep technical expertise in certain areas. So rejection is part of life. There are other jobs that I've wanted where I've asked for it and it went to somebody else and I've wondered why. But for me, it's been about, I'll take a role that many other people may not take just because I want to get the experience in that. And because that could then land me, because then I know that I'm confident that I can take it and turn that business around or, turn that role around. It happened to me even in engineering. I picked up a role as an engineering director to get promoted from a senior manager to an engineering director, where somebody said, oh my God, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. That thing is so fraught with quality issues right now. 3 years later, we won the Software Quality Award. So yes, if you have, to me, think about the fact that in everybody's career, even though what's written on their bio looks so awesome, rejection is part of everybody's career. So I would ask I would go back and do some introspection in terms of saying, if it's not the roles that if there's a possibility to go back to those people and ask them, so, when you look at my resume and you look at how I interviewed, what are the things you would say that you need me to do that would make me more of an attractive candidate to you? If there's an opportunity to do that and they respond back, I think that's fantastic. At least you get some feedback. I would still look for roles that may not be the most obvious and take those on. I think my career is filled with probably 50% of the roles I took, I didn't want to do it. And after doing it, I've gone, wow, there were smarter people and wiser people than me when they suggested those roles. Made complete sense. So I would also look at other areas where you could move into sales once you do that. And maybe it's you start in marketing. I don't know if this is applicable. And is it possible for you to move into sales after that? Right? So, think about that. For me to move into a GM role, I had to do 2, 3 other roles before I got that GM. It takes grit, which I know many of us have. It takes that perseverance. It takes thinking about the long game in terms of what you want to do. And, you think about it and go, how can I make progress in chunks? So it's more like training your mind to do that is what I would say.
Awesome. We all fail. It is true. All right. We have time for one final question that we'll have to do somewhat quickly, but Vidika Dayal, you are welcome to come on stage and you can turn your video on and your audio on. Vidika is a student at UC Berkeley, interning in product management this summer. So Vidika, welcome.
Hi, Liz. Thank you so much for this talk. It was super, super helpful. I really appreciate it. I know one of the things that you're passionate about is innovation. And as a student, I've also been super interested in innovation and have been trying to decide how I want to start my career. What made you decide to pursue this at a corporation instead of in a startup environment?
For me, I think in terms of, it's very candidly, getting a paycheck was important. That financial independence was super important. And nowadays it's a little bit different. There are a lot of startups that are super well funded where you don't have to forego your salary. So maybe now, if I'd started off now, I would think differently. But when I was starting off, I love the idea of a startup, right? Because there you get an opportunity to do multiple different roles. You're not just, within very functional roles as well, just because there's fewer people doing, many things within the company. But that financial independence was something, and taking a risk financially was something for me that I wasn't willing to give up, and a corporation offered that. So that was a big motivating factor for me. Now, I'm a big part of doing innovation within the company itself, and a big focus is around how do we solve for our customers' problems, and how do we even solve for problems that don't even know that's coming. So that was my way in terms of how I looked at it. As you're graduating, right now, Vidika, what I would suggest is think about how do you prioritize what's important to you, right? Is it the financial piece of it? Is it the type of role? Is it a specific domain? I would lay that out and say that helps you decide, what kind of company, big company, a startup, you want to be in a place where you're doing multiple different roles. A startup is a great example of that. And, or you want to be in a company where, you can probably after a year move on to something different, or maybe it's a year and a half. So I think there's a lot of things that only you can decide for yourself in terms of what matters to you, because what matters to you would be different from what matters to somebody else, right? So I think it's a great time to graduate and kind of the opportunities out there. But also, even as we were talking about the prior experience of getting rejected as well, just know that there's a ton of really good opportunities out there. I would just keep your mind open, not just focus on, but it has to be this exactly. Because I've been there a few times and realized that there were others, mentors and sponsors, who nudged me to say, don't just have that one narrow thinking, kind of open it up a little bit. And especially as you're early in career, God, you have the opportunity to do that more so than where I am right now.
Thank you so much for coming on, Dadika, and asking your question. All right, so with that, we are somehow up for time. This hour has flown by, but Liz, thank you so much for joining. If anyone on here wants to kind of follow you, do you tweet or LinkedIn or anything like that they can follow you on?
Twitter would be great. I'm trying to get better at kind of putting more of my thoughts out there as well. This is part of managing my time. So Twitter's great, LinkedIn's great. So all of that, I would say. And it's been wonderful. Thank you for inviting me. I wish we had more time. We could keep going.
No, thank you so much. I learned a lot personally from this, and I'm sure everyone else did as well, based on the chats I'm seeing and the emojis and everything. So thank you so much. And to everyone watching, thank you for joining. If this is your first one, thank you for being on. I think it was a fantastic example of what this series was all about. If you're interested in learning more about the series and watching prior ones, this recording, as well as all others, will be on nationalinternday.com. Just press the intern section and you'll see a whole lot of content there. But Liz, thank you. This is fantastic. I now know what leading strategy actually means, so that's really helpful. And to everyone watching, thank you and have a great rest of your week. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye.